Hello again, ladies and gents. As I mentioned earlier, just to interrupt and break up the meetup today to introduce our guest speaker, and delighted that Ben Mercer is joining us today. And as I said at the start, Ben is a writer, he's an author, he's a former professional rugby player, and Ben's first book was called Fringes, and Life on the Edge of Professional Rugby, and a very unique a unique take on professional sport in general. We're used to having Olympians and former professional athletes that have been at the top of their game, but Ben's book focuses on those that are on the outside slightly and what happens to those. But an avid writer, an avid writer and an author, #1 best-selling author on Amazon. So I will find Ben in the list and invite him up onto the screen with me to get going. So hopefully he should pop up now. Morning, Ben.
Hi, you right?
How are you, mate? You okay?
Me?
Yeah, good. Thanks for taking the time out. And I will just mention that if anyone has any questions for Ben as we go, feel free to pop them in the Q&A area and on the right-hand side, and I will pick them up and either address them as we go or at the end. So Ben, as I said earlier, I led with the writer, the author, and then the former professional rugby player, because that's I know it's a big passion of yours, the writing, and a degree from Newcastle University in English literature. Yeah, it's no mean feat. So, but we'll start off on the rugby side because that's sort of where you made your name and things like that. Just give us a couple of highlights from your career and your time in rugby.
Yeah, so I grew up in Bath. I went to school in Bath, so it's rugby city, and that's kind of what everyone wants to do. And I played youth rugby at Bath, and got picked up by the academy, captained the team there, and kind of did all that while I was at school. And for a year after school, went to university, went to Newcastle, did the English degree, like you said, and I kind of got involved with the Falcons a bit, and I played at Blaydon as well, who were in National 1 at the time. So had a good year with them, and so when I graduated, I signed for Plymouth Albion, which was full-time, and that was in the Championship. So that's the second tier of rugby in England. I played a couple of years there. That was good fun. I had a year in Sydney, which was really good fun, where I kind of played part-time and did some work and coaching and various other kind of jobs around Sydney, and went to the beach every day, so that was great. Then I played for Cornish Pirates for a year, which was slightly colder beach, which is a bit of a shame. And then I went to France, which is where I spent the last 4 years of my career. I played for a team called Stade Rouennais, which is in Rouen, so Normandy in the north of France. And so that's from when I was about 25, 26 to when I was 30. And the book that I've written is it details mostly my time in France, but it sort of ducks off to talk about, it touched on a few other periods of playing rugby as well.
Sure, and it was the experience in France was the inspiration behind the book, and I've read a lot about the culture of rugby in France. What was it like moving to France? What was it like playing in France? Because like anyone in here as a job, if you're moving to another country, the cultures and everything like completely different. What was it like in from a rugby perspective?
It was something I always wanted to do. I always loved watching Toulouse. They're one of my favourite teams, and they're sort of very well known for their jouet. They fling the ball around, they have loads of fun. It's kind of a bit crazy, very emotional. They could be on a real roll, and they could beat anybody, and they could be awful and really sort of stink the place up. So it was a lot like that, and it's very disorganised. It's a lot less professional. And that's good and bad, because I think there are some things about professional sport that are probably a bit too regimented or a bit too analytical, and actually they kind of don't care about the conditioning or the nutrition, as long as if you play well, they're sort of not that interested. But there are a lot of nice aspects of that. So every day, we'd train in the morning, and then we'd go and eat, and we'd have the whole club. It wouldn't just be the players, it'd be all the staff, anyone that worked in the office. Old boys who volunteered would come and they'd cook lunch for everybody, and we'd sit down and have a big lunch all together, and that was great. And that's not something that happens at other in professional sport in England, really. But yeah, there are definitely aspects of it that are really frustrating when you're hoping someone's going to take a bit more care of themselves, or they might actually kind of learn the plays that you're supposed to be running. So it's definitely a sort of mixed bag on that front.
Good, and I know there's a few stories that are probably best saved for after Watershed, but we'll move on to the book. And as I said, it's a real unique a perspective of life in sport, but on the edge, and that's very much where you were throughout your career. You weren't at the top in terms of the Premiership and playing for those sort of titles and playing for England and things like that. So it's a really interesting perspective, and I think that's why it went down so well, because it gives people that insight into it's not all the shiny cars and the glitz and the glamour as people may think. But from what was your initial inspiration, and what was that process in terms of writing a book? How did that all come to fruition?
Yeah, I was experimenting with my own writing, and I wrote a piece about retiring from rugby that got I posted on LinkedIn. It got quite a lot of traction, and somebody offered me to do some blogging. So, it wasn't for very much money, and I was just doing it really to kind of practice and get better at writing. And while I was doing that, I was building up a bank of my own material, and over time, the kind of concept in my mind formed. And like you said, there's this kind of fringe professional that nobody hears about, but it's actually probably numerically that's most of the guys who are playing. So there's only 12 Premiership teams, but there's loads of teams outside the Premiership. In France there's 14 top teams, but there are the division I played, there's 40 teams. So there's actually loads of these players you never hear about, have quite crazy stories and have to kind of put up with a lot of different things. And so while the story's about me, I was also hoping to kind of represent the experience of people I knew, the other professionals of my level. And also I thought there's a gap in the market. It was a good differentiator. Like you said, every single book is about, someone who's won the World Cup. It's the captain of England or, whoever else. It's got a big picture of them on the front, and it's all about them, and it's ghost written. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to do everything differently. It's going to be about almost every other professional you don't hear about. It's going to have a graphic cover. It's not going to have a photo of me. It's not going to be ghost written. It's going to be written by me. So it can be a lot more kind of direct. And I just felt that there was this gap, and I could be a lot more forthright than maybe, someone who plays for England is probably kind of compromised in terms of a lot of the relationships around them. They don't want to jeopardize and things like that. Whereas for me, I'm writing about people no one's ever heard of, so it doesn't really make a big difference. I can be a lot more honest about, how it feels to be a professional, I suppose.
Yeah, and you're quoted on saying on page 2 that rugby is not a good option as a career path, and you break the mold slightly, given how articulate you are and given the way that you write, and so. What has that process taught you from writing a book? It is almost like starting a business, as it were, and selling that product, because if I have it right, it was a self-published book without any marketing spend. So what has that process taught you, and what have you taken away from that process as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, self-publishing is something that I've been following as a bit of a trend, and I was quite keen on the idea because it meant that I wouldn't have to compromise for one thing on what I wanted to do. I could do it quite quickly, and I could learn a load of new skills, like you said. And I thought, leaving rugby, you have a load of soft skills. Everybody says, you've got all these kind of teamwork and, leadership characteristics or, whatever, but you actually lack a lot of hard skills, in terms of marketing and selling and those sorts of things. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to do those. And also it was hard for me to find a publisher. It was something I looked at concurrently. But yeah, the marketing and things like that, I find it really interesting. And so I touched on it there, sort of defining yourself by opposition. It's like, okay, this book isn't like all the others. It's a bit, Donald Trumpish maybe, like I'm not like all these guys, but so I kind of tried to bake in a lot of those principles into the cover design. I wrote all the copy for the Amazon listing myself. So had to be quite, learn the principles around copywriting and advertising and things like that. Yeah. And, in terms of linking up with people on social media to help market it and try and get it in front of everyone. So it was really good learning experience for me, for sure. Good.
Well, we'll definitely share the link to it with everyone. And I know there's a 100-page free version for people to get their teeth stuck into, isn't there? But
yeah.
But in terms of your writing, and I know it's something you're very passionate about, and you're doing it a lot with brands and startups you're very passionate about, and entrepreneurs. What for people here, and it's something that we're seeing a lot, and a common trend amongst our members, is the need for people to perhaps write more or publish more content online. What sort of inspiration do you take for writing, or perhaps any tips that you perhaps live by, or principles you live by in your writing that may help people?
I read a lot, so it's always been my favorite hobby. When I was a kid, it was every night, I'd lie in bed and read for hours, and I still do. I read widely. I kind of don't discriminate too much. If I like something, I like it. I don't necessarily privilege one thing over another, and I build up a bank of material, and you just don't know if you can keep that kind of organized. I have a sort of system in an app I use called Notion. I tag everything by topic, by author, by what it is. It might be a tweet, it might be an article, it might be notes from a book I've read. And and if you can keep that bank of material organized, then you have a load of things that you find interesting. And I think because you find them interesting, that comes through when you then create some content for somebody else. And I think there's so much content that it needs two things really. It needs to be useful, and it needs to be as entertaining as you can make it. And I think when things are entertaining, it's because you're into it and you like it, or maybe you found something that you find interesting elsewhere that you can draw a parallel with or to. So yeah, I'd say readers, consume things that you like, and find those things that you like, and don't be too bothered about where they're from. And actually you'll be able to draw them into something and create something that will be a bit different and that will have a bit of personality in it. And I think the personality is what everyone's after now. It needs to kind of have its own tone and voice.
Absolutely. No, completely agree. You've got to cut through the noise, haven't you? And try and be, I think, as human as possible with your content out there. And in terms of your reading and where you seek inspiration from, where are you looking? Where do you tend to find things for the work that you're doing?
Oh, Twitter's been great for me. I mean, I've had a Twitter account for a long time. I wish I'd bothered with it more when I was playing in France and things like that. But I find loads of interesting things to read through, recommendations on Twitter, interesting people to follow. And I could definitely do it better and make some lists of people and things like that. But I find a lot on there. I read a lot of, I stopped reading fiction for a bit, but, I've got back into that. So I read a lot of fiction. But apart from that, I just, try and go as widely as possible, really. And there are certain people, I might find a person, a particular creator that I admire, and I'll just kind of go after that person. And I'll find articles and posts and books and things they've made. And I'll just make a little repository around that person, maybe. So, and just try and see, maybe not necessarily what the things are, but maybe the principles that they take from project to project. Mm. And, that's how that's what I find interesting, where people find their own combinations from and how they create.
Sure. And a couple more questions, Ben, is firstly, what's the future for you? What's next with your writing? I know it's something you'll continue to do. So what's next? Another book, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to write another book. I think right now I'm still in a phase where, this book came together because I was practicing and writing things in my own time, and then the idea kind of formed out of that. So I think I'm probably still in that phase when it comes to another book project. But there are certain themes I find interesting, and one of them is this idea of the sort of scholar athlete, so people who pursue maybe intellectual, creative sort of side of life, but also the sort of active, physical, creative things in the world. And that's an idea I'm kind of keen to explore. But beyond that, I'm not really sure at the minute. I'm sort of writing in various different directions and seeing what's going to grab my interest. But I'd love to write a novel at some point. But I don't think I'm quite ready yet.
Good man. We'll keep an eye out for it. And also your involvement with LAPS, who we've got a good relationship, Life After Professional Sport, who are really that bridge between professional sport and the business world. And it's something that you've been really involved in for the last few months. And that's how we met. What are you seeing out there at the moment from a sporting perspective? Because it goes without saying that sport, like a lot of industries have been badly affected, and the future is very uncertain. So what can businesses perhaps do for professional athletes coming out of the game, those that are on the fringes, that it's a real knife edge, isn't it? So what are you guys looking for from businesses, or what could businesses do to integrate perhaps professional athletes into their businesses or into the business world, because they are very valuable assets potentially?
Yeah, I think athletes have a lot of energy and they've got some great characteristics in terms of, if you tell them to do something and then if you tell them where they're going wrong, they'll kind of take that on the chin and improve and get on with it. But they will need an initial kind of bit of steering, I suppose. But I think the future, as I see it, and particularly with lower tier teams, so maybe not the Premiership teams, maybe teams just below that level, is maybe more of a dual career setup. So where people almost going back to the sort of amateur era a little bit, but they'll essentially live like a professional athlete, but maybe they'll train 2 days or 2.5 days a week and maybe link up with the local business the other 2 days, or they'll be mentored. And that requires the athletes to go and find those opportunities themselves as well. But I think a team to look at that are kind of exploring in that direction, and Nottingham Rugby Union seems to be doing a good job of saying, look, guys, we can't really pay you loads of money. It's a good level of rugby. You can come in, you can train, we can have the gym open for you so you can fit in your kind of conditioning in your own time rather than taking up the daytime. We'll pay you to kind of remain in good shape, to do your sessions, to play on the weekend. But also, here are kind of affiliate local businesses, and kind of that you almost create a portfolio career for yourself around, your sport, but also something that's going to kind of sustain you, from your 30s or from wherever you get hurt and have to stop. So I think maybe that hybrid career is a really kind of good way forward. And the other thing I think for athletes is to, whether they like it or not, actually to work on their personal brand. And that's on the field, but that's also cultivating your other interests. And so just so even if you are still a full-time athlete, that actually it's like, okay, I'm an athlete, but also I'm into garden design or, music or whatever it is. And just, actually create some sort of content and ways in that people can kind of start a conversation with you. I think that's going to become increasingly important.
Great. Well, look, we're really appreciative of your time with us. I'll end with one question, but just before I do, it's a really we get a real range of speakers in from all walks of life, and it's nice to get someone that's really given a different perspective to life in professional sport. It's not exactly what it seems to be that people may read about, but also to know that there's lots going on outside of that. Which we do try and end on is if we're hosting a dinner party and you can bring 3 people, dead or alive, who would that be?
Well, that's a tough one, and I'm single at the minute, which might change my answer. But no, I think the person I think is doing really interesting things. I think people get him wrong a lot. I think is actually Kanye West, and I'd definitely invite him, and he'd be entertaining at the very least, and I think fascinating if nothing else. I think I'd invite him, and then beyond that, this is actually quite difficult. I don't know. I think William Finnegan. So his book was one of the inspirations for my book. It's called Barbarian Days, and he won the Pulitzer Prize. It's about his life as a surfer, and he's an older guy now. He writes to the New Yorker, but he's got an amazing life story. I'd love to have him and listen to him. And yeah, I don't know. So it's a tough call. Maybe I'd invite Joan of Arc, because I lived in Rouen for so long. I'd invite Joan of Arc. She was obviously a very singular character, and I heard so much about her when I lived in Rouen. Everyone blaming English people for, her situation. So I like her side of the story. So I'd probably invite her too.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we've got time for at the minute, Ben. I was just maybe anticipating a question from Anna Townsend, but hasn't come through. But really appreciate your time, Ben. Thanks for joining us, and we'll continue the relationship with Laps, because that gap between professional sport and professional athletes coming out of the game is very crucial. And I know the work that you're doing. Richard Ranson has come in last minute with a question. What's your favourite author or book?
My favourite book, definitely The Count of Monte Cristo. I've read it, I don't know, a few times. I absolutely love it. It's a really long book, but I don't think there's a wasted word. It's really exciting. It's just got a bit of everything. So that's my favourite book. And I think my favourite author, I think the person whose style I admire the most is maybe Michael Lewis. So he wrote financial stuff. So he wrote The Big Short, which you might have seen the film of relatively recently. And he wrote some other books around sort of, he makes quite boring financial things, actually really entertaining. He's got great style. But he also wrote Moneyball and a couple of other sports books. The Blind Side he wrote. So a lot of these books have since become films, but he's a great non-fiction writer. He's got an amazing style, and he can make anything, exciting. So I think he's definitely somebody you could dip in anywhere and have a great time reading one of them.
Yeah, good stuff. Awesome, Ben. Well, as I say, really appreciate your time joining us. Is again a very different perspective and a different life story we've heard today. So thanks very much, and do stick around in the room if you want. We're going to get back into some more networking. So I'll take you off screen, but thanks very much, Ben. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I'll definitely hang around for a bit.
Nice
so
one.
say hi.
Good man, Ben. Cheers.
Cheers.
Great. Well, thanks very much to Ben. And now we'll